Repost and from the creepypasta general, as there was no green text thread. Posting an encounter I had when I was a kid, in Quebec. School outing for like a week at a winter camp. Don't remember the town. One night we go out in the clearing and make a big fire to eat marshmallows and shit. As we're about to go back to the camp, adults are checking to make sure every kid is here. I look around to make sure no one is left behind. One kid is way out by the tree line. Wave with emphasis at him so he sees me, not sure if I yelled for him. Try to see who it is and about to tell an adult. Realize he got no face. No eyes, no eyebrows, possibly no mouth, just skin. Otherwise he looks like a normal kid, wearing a coat, snow pants, winter hat. Freak out and only tell my friends later on when they're telling spooky stories. Sorry for the lack of details, this happened like 20-something years ago. What did I see? When I realized it got no face, I knew it was something dangerous, but I also knew it wasn't evil. Like a cat stalking a bird, there's no malice, just nature playing its role. Best I could find was Napara. But that's a Japanese yokai.
Be me. Have long curly hair that either looks like Goldilocks or Lord of the Flies, nothing in between. Super skinny, but with lean definition. Wear skin-tight clothing and a beanie. Have day off work. Decide to just pick a direction and drive after eating breakfast. Take my K-bar knife with me. After getting out into the edges of some suburban area, pull out phone. Search for nearest nature trail. Find some random one next to some weird land development where they're digging out a huge gulch for what looks like a dam. Park next to trail entrance. Get out and then walk towards trail. Only one other car. Silver Nissan sedan parked directly in front of it with some fat old codger sitting in the driver's. Dude is just staring forwards at the trail. His head snaps to me as I pass his car to enter the trail. Just ignore him. Enjoy walk at first, make it about a quarter mile in, and pass a few side trails. Suddenly hear shuffling against the pavement behind me, followed by the sound of Fatso huffing. Slightly turn head back and see Fatso Codger intently looking at me while one hand is on his chest, and the other is fumbling around his waistline as if reaching for something. Get creeped out, walk a bit faster and dip down the next side trail that pops up. Make it about 20 yards up into side trail, where I meet a fork that looks to loop to a point earlier in the trail. Stop walking to see if Fatso is following me. He comes up the part of the trail that loops back to the beginning, absolutely panting his ass off. Dip down the other fork, which leads to an access way for electrical towers. He gets a good look at my knife and face when I run off. Looks absolutely surprised. Follow it back to the road, and then the parking lot for the trail. Fatso's car is gone. Instead of leaving, walk in the middle of a grass patch and watch some buzzards circle over the nearby gulch. Black guy pulls up with his kids in a black sedan. Hops out and offers to share a joint. Goes on about life and how you should enjoy regardless of your fears. Leaves, saying he's going fishing with his kids. Feel a bit motivated, go back and walk the trail for an hour or so. When I leave there's 2 new cars, a newer Explorer with a couple in jogger attire. Other car is an old red Camry, and Fatso is sitting in the passengers with a pair of sunglasses. Hits the shoulder of some hag Aldo with sunglasses and drivers. They both glare daggers at me as I get in my car and leave. Probably thought I was a woman he could easily assault due to my size and hair. Probably dipped out for a bit to try his luck again later.
Phone posting. Be me. Around 7 or 8 years old. Dad stationed in Fort Irwin, California. Takes me and my brother out into the desert to hunt for treasure. Lots of fun, find all sorts of cool things. One weekend big group of my dad and his friends and their kids. Around 3 or 4 dads and maybe 8 kids. Driving through desert and eventually stopped by what I was told was an old mine. Exploring the area with my brother and start to walk towards the mine. Don't get too close anon, could be dangerous. Old mine, rocks could fall, checks out. Glance at the cave entrance. 3 sets of glowing red orbs. Dad, what are those? Dad looks. What the actual hell? JPG. All of a sudden, the dads are in full GTFO mode. We pack up and skedaddle. Ask Dad on the way back home what those were. They looked like red eyes. Oh, those were reflectors so people don't wander into mine shafts. It made sense at the time, but I know I was being lied to. My dad won't talk about it. Can't find any info, but 30 years later I still remember those red eyes staring at me from the cave.
Be me. Family rents an Airbnb in Michigan for a family get-together. It's a huge 2-story cabin. Get a room on the 2nd floor. After first night, sister on 1st floor complains about animal noises keeping her up at night. Shuffling and heavy breathing around her window for a couple hours. Didn't see anything. Offer to trade rooms and she accepts. That night after I shower, walk in with a towel around my waist. Hear the exact noises sister described from the other night. Sounds like a cross between a rooting bear and panting dog. Walk up to window. See nothing. Suddenly something. Silhouette moving, backlight adjacent some pale moonlight and light from my room. Is coming closer. Get goosebumps from ominous aura, but I'm too curious. Huge furry paw steps into the light, followed by another. A pair of huge eyes finally catches light from my room, and glow yellow. Head slowly pulled into view by 2 ripped arms covered in gray fur. Brain fear response is dulled because I'm a furry. Sense of arousal from PRN addiction keeps me from screaming. Stare at its grizzled face, its pupils stare balefully at me. Into the abyss.jpg. Put my fingers in a V shape up to my face. Make rude gestures at it by shoving my tongue through the gap in my fingers. Its pupils go from widened slits to thin lines. See it gulp from its neck muscles moving. Promptly turns tail and lets out a sonorous yip. Didn't see it again for the rest of the trip. I did it, Annans.
Saw Sasquatch once, but it was fairly anticlimactic. Happened a good 20-ish years back now in early 2000s. Be mid-20s with then girlfriend, now wife. Off-roading an old shit-kicked K10. Scouting around behind Squamish on logging and FSR trails looking for places to camp with larger group later. The area then is not like it is now. You would sometimes see other people off-roading, but it wasn't the crowded mess it has been since 2010. Truck runs okay but exhaust is a rotting pos. Rumbling along one road that is getting narrower and rougher as we go. We are way up the Alaho Valley at this point. Sure enough, hear a clank and a dragging noise after one too many bounces. Stop truck and investigate. Exhaust has broken just past the rear axle. Last elbow is hanging and dragging on the ground. Time for redneck engineering.jpg. Grab some twine from the bed to rig hanging part back up. Waiting for exhaust to cool off, getting teased by GF. Suddenly hear very loud yell. Sounded deep, like the sound a man would make deadlifting. Like a ooh. Sounded like it came from way down the valley. Everything gets super quiet. Only sound is faintly of the river. Exchange look with GF. Assume it was someone messing about closer to the river. Rig up exhaust and carry on. Further on, bouncing about. Hear familiar clank and dragging. Get out of truck. GF is having field day. Get roasted for a few waiting for pipe to cool again. Knelt down beside truck assessing situation. Suddenly GF gasps out my name and grabs onto me from above with death grip. Look up to see what's up. See large dark brown mass over the edge of the road about 20 to 30 meters in front of the truck, leaning out from behind tree. My first thought was that it was a bear until I realized what I was looking at had a humanoid face. It had a really prominent ridge over its eyes, which shadowed them, making it impossible to see detail. The nose was flat but fairly well defined and looked almost slightly upturned. Mouth had almost a muzzle to it. Like Homer Simpson, but it jutted out in front of its face slightly, near parallel with the end of its nose. Am literally dumbfounded by what I'm looking at. Just staring for what feels like an eternity. Eventually it makes a weird sort of snort and steps away from behind the tree before ambling back down the hill. Look at it as it wanders off. It was huge. 7 to 8 feet tall easy. Turn back to truck. Grab exhaust and wrench it clean off. Was thankfully easy due to being 90% rotted off anyways. Get back in truck and drive off down the valley and back to civilization. The weirdest thing was it was really not that scary. Or at least not paranormal scary. It was perturbing looking at an animal that size, but it wasn't exactly gesturing aggressively and it left back down the hill and out of sight on its own. If anything, I'm honestly curious to see one again, but in all the time since then roaming the area, I've never seen one since. Sorry it's anticlimactic, but I know what I saw.
Heard this story from my good friend from high school. His brother and mom also confirmed to me that the incident happened. His dad refuses to ever talk about it. Friend is 11 or 12 years old, his brother is 2 years younger. Parents are very normal, straight-laced boomers. Family moves to Jefferson County, Missouri, about 30 minutes outside St. Louis, from another state. House is in a secluded area. Big property with no immediate neighbors. Parents go out one night and leave the boys home alone. Come home a few hours later, walk into house. 2 tall humanoid creatures are standing in their kitchen staring at them. Like a cross between gray aliens and humans, both are naked. His mom showed me a crude drawing she made of them. Both parents immediately freak out, run out of kitchen to look for the boys. Mom finds them in my friend's bedroom. They're playing video games and have no idea what's going on. Dad only left the kitchen for maybe 10 seconds, but the humanoids are gone without a trace. They call police who come and find no signs of a break-in. They sold the house a couple years later and nothing else weird ever happened. I've been listening to a lot of old Open Lines episodes of Art Belair a Coast to Coast AM lately, and there are a decent amount of callers from Jefferson County who have stories about various paranormal stuff in that area. It's a hot spot for sure.
Camping in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas. Sitting on ridge, forest on one side and a somewhat steep bluff that drops off on the other. Doing a final check of my pole and tackle for some night fishing at a nearby lake. Notice a bright blue light on the horizon. Look back down and keep fumbling with my tackle. After a couple minutes look back up and notice it's gotten brighter. Odd. Stand up facing horizon and bluff edge, noticing that it's actively getting ridiculously bright. Something in my head finally clicked and realized it might be getting brighter because it's getting closer. Unexplainable sense of urgency and dread fills me, causing me to dig my pistol out of my pack along with my phone. Steady my hand and try to take a photo. The blue light suddenly zips right to left, and back again. It darts overhead and my head began to feel like it was being squeezed. Object goes into tree line, then back overhead numerous times over the span of a few minutes. It's insanely fast. I scramble for the cover of the trees and by this point my head feels like it's going to implode. Wake up next morning at the bottom of the bluff being checked out by a game warden and medical rescue with no memory of how I got down there. Anon, we found your camp up there. Have you been drinking or doing drugs? We think you tripped and fell. Get evaluated at hospital. Aside from a fractured rib, ankle, and bruised back, the only noteworthy injury is a chemical rash on my back and shoulder that resembled sunburn and cleared up in a few days. Never told a soul, and never seen anything like it again.
Not really a paranormal story since it involves drug use, but it's kinda spooky and I still think about it a lot. Be young and stupid, decide to smoke salvia. Felt almost nothing the first 2 times. Smoke it for a 3rd time, deep inhale, massive hit. Instantly fall through a fractal portal of undulating yellow and blue light. Come back to reality, I'm on the floor of my bathroom. However, I am tiny and the tiles stretch on forever. The bathroom disappears, I'm on a different planet near a city made of geometric light blocks. I went into the city, but I don't remember what happened. After leaving the city, I roamed a Martian-like world for what felt like 25 years. It was absolute barren with only rocks. No life other than myself here. I just walked around looking for anything. Suddenly I look up into the night sky, it's my then girlfriend's face. She's the entire sky, her eyes are filled with stars. She's trying to speak to me but I don't understand. Now here's the part that really stuck with me and felt paranormal. Her face vanishes. These three giant hat-man-looking silhouettes appeared, their waiting stretching from behind the horizon. They weren't quite like Hat-Man, but they had pointy heads with two sides jutting out from where their temples would be, giving them a four-star shaped head. I get a gut feeling I can't trust them. The middle one talks in a language that is incomprehensible to me. It then said, "You are a spy." In my hands appeared a large stack of papers, printed on each of them were pictures of the Earth and North America. The middle one reaches with his massive shadow arm, stretching across the entire sky, and picks me up. He hurls me into atmosphere. I feel like I'm traveling faster than light. I see just streaks of light as I just speed past everything. Suddenly I see the Earth, I'm then racing through the atmosphere, my POV looks like when you zoom in on Google Earth. I go through the roof of my house and then back into my body. I come to. I woke up in my bathroom, my then GF there asking me if I was okay. I brush her off quickly and told her I was fine. I could see those papers still in my hands, but they were turning transparent and fading away from reality. I feel slightly panicked that I couldn't remember/understand what the giant shadow man had said to me. It felt like an urgent message. A little bit later I feel mostly fine, just kinda dazed. Asked my GF how long I was tripping. It was only about 3 minutes. Which surprised me because it felt like it had been years. I know, it's not really a supernatural story, but it's something that has really stuck with me and it felt like it actually happened. I genuinely feel like I lived on the world for decades, and sometimes I feel like my true age is much older than my biological age.
As a Secret Service agent, I was chosen for a mission described as a simulation of first contact. My job was liaison, an expendable asset in case contact was dangerous. A Korean woman was brought into the room. I was given an order not to look up at her head. However, since from the neck down she didn't look like an alien, I decided to look up anyway. The first sensation I felt was pain, as if my head was on fire. I saw a light show. It looked as though tendrils or filaments were exiting her eyes and wrapping around my forehead. I heard a voice in my head accompanied by a headache. I don't recall in what order everything else happened. It is as if after meeting her I became aware of every possible version of what could have happened, as though I was seeing every outcome at once rather than a single perspective. Everything kept repeating. With each repetition I would be there in the room again and events would unfold differently. Each time the scenario would end with a blue light and then nothing. The last repetition I remember is after looking into her eyes, 2 agents grabbed me by the shoulders and injected a drug through my nose into my brain to pause my memories. Then we watched a video recording of one of the other scenarios which ended with a blue light. I could be an unlucky guinea pig who experienced a drug-induced psychological torture experiment which has left me completely insane. It is probable that I have hallucinated all of this, but that isn't what I believe, which certainly lends credence to insanity. Often as I've recalled these events I have convinced myself that it is all a nightmare, or that I am being experimented on, or that I have developed schizophrenia and hallucinated everything, and that is what I would conclude if I did not continue to experience hallucinations of evidence to the contrary. I believe it was real, that what I experienced was not a simulation, it was first contact with a super-intelligent alien brain parasite.
This one's sorta underwhelming, but at least it's real. Be Me, High Schooler, July 2016. Have an important exam at school on a Saturday morning. Finish exam, and head home with 3 friends. We're riding bikes to the woods near my house. Not all woods, but a very large area of meadows intertwined with forests, lots of trails and cyclists. Spend the afternoon riding with them. It's now close to 6 p.m., and I lead the path. My friends are tired and lag behind. I'm ahead by almost half a mile and finally stop when the path bifurcated. To the left the path goes among the low grass, to the right it goes side by side with the dense forest. As I wait by the forest, someone starts coughing and moaning, sounds like an old man. He just coughs and sighs for almost a minute straight. I say, "Hey man, you alright?" Thinking it's some weary cyclist. Look around after hearing no response, only to realize the sounds came from the woods. It's getting dark and I can't see even 3 meters into the forest. Well, there's gotta be some path I don't know about in there. Poor dude, he probably can't see shit in there. My friends finally come, I tell them about this and they get weirded out, but we forget about it and go home. Months later I remembered what happened and kinda freak out. After several other incursions across the area I finally understood that aren't any paths or trails in. That are, and that the vegetation is so dense you couldn't actually just walk around there, at least not without lights and a lot of noise, none of which happened. To this day I have no idea what the hell was that.
I drive trucks for a dairy farm in northern Alberta and I have noticed something strange happening up there/x/. For those of you who are unfamiliar with what a biogas plant is, how it works or what they're actually used for, allow me to educate you. A biogas plant produces natural gas, or rather a substitute for natural gas, from fermented corn silage as well as other agricultural waste products. Farmers, such as myself, would bring in silage which we would unload into a large concrete bunker silo, basically just a big walled-in pit. The plant I delivered to used a modified snowcat to push the silage around and pack it down evenly in the pit. Once one pit filled up they would tarp it and leave it to ferment and move on to the next pit. Once a pit was fully fermented they would uncover it and use a large wheel loader to shovel the fermented silage into what's called an anaerobic digester. It's basically just a big tank with an agitator that you fill up with a bunch of organic matter and heat it up, which produces methane gas as the microorganisms inside begin to break everything down. This gas is then captured and can be used for basically everything natural gas is used for already, but it's supposed to be better for the environment or something. These plants are way more common in Europe, but they have started to pop up here in North America as well. And yes, before you ask, these places smell worse than you could possibly imagine. I always thought it was a little bit weird that they built one way up here in northern Alberta, but since the large dairy farm I worked at pretty much always had an excess of corn silage every year, we certainly welcomed another place to sell it to, especially since they're not picky. Trying to sell to another dairy farmer is always a hassle because they're always concerned with the quality, as they should be if they're feeding it to their cows. But the biogas plant basically just needs organic matter, it doesn't really matter what it is. If it can decompose you can make gas out of it. Last fall we had an exceptionally good corn harvest, to the point where we still had 4 more fields still to harvest by the time we had enough to feed the cows for the next year. As I said, this isn't uncommon. When you're harvesting corn for silage you use a totally different harvester. Rather than a combine that separates out the actual corn kernels from the rest of the plant, you use a forage harvester, which is essentially a giant wood chipper on wheels that takes in the whole crop and shreds it up. Since corn can easily grow 10 feet high and you spread that over a few thousand acres, you get a crazy high volume of silage coming in. Upon realizing how much excess we had, my boss did what he always did and called up the plant, who has always agreed to take in what we didn't need. The next morning, rather than trucking back to the farm, we were instructed to head straight over to the plant once our trailers had filled up. I arrived with my first load at the plant around 10 a.m. A man wearing a high-vis jacket directed me onto the large scale they used to weigh the trucks coming in and out. "Good harvest this year, Jim," the friendly old lady in the scale house said. She took down the weight off my loaded truck. I felt bad as I had been delivering to this plant on and off for the last 8 years I had worked on Mr. Baker's dairy farm, but I couldn't remember, or I'd just never learned her name. I certainly wasn't going to out myself now. Well, if we're delivering here you know it's a good one, I replied. And there's plenty more where this came from. Glad to hear it. She smiled back at me and handed me my paperwork. Now you just head right on down to the back there and the boys will show you where to dump. I said thank you and took the papers from her and put my truck back into gear. I pulled off the scale and made my way to the back of the plant where the big concrete pits are. Some more men in high-vis gear directed me to back into a specific one. The giant pit was only about half full at this point, but the mountain of silage in my rearview mirror still looked to be about 30 feet deep at its highest point. As usual, they had me back up until my trailer started to climb the pile a bit. This way there were no gaps in the pile and the snowcat wouldn't have to do as much pushing. As I watched the back wheels of my trailer roll onto the silage pile in my mirrors, I heard the unmistakable sound of a tire blowing out. A loud pop and then a slow hiss that quickly dissipated. I yelled out shit and I hopped out to inspect the damage. One of the workers had also come to see what had happened. Must be one of your inside tires, he said to me as I approached. All the outside ones look fine. I bent down and looked under the truck. Sure enough, he was right. The inside tire on the right side of the rear axle was completely flat. Well, I suppose that's why semi-trucks have dual wheels, I said, trying to sound unfazed while simultaneously preparing myself for the ass chewing I was bound to receive for this later. I walked around to the back of the truck to inspect the damage further and saw what had punctured my tire. I stumbled back a bit as I realized it was what appeared to be a broken bone sticking out of the tire. What the? I said, mostly to myself, but the worker must have heard too, as it caused him to look down at it as well. When he did, his face went white for a second, then he composed himself. Well, I'll be damned, he said. I've been here since the plant opened and I ain't never seen that before. Some poor animal must have gone through the forage harvester, or some farmer's dog must have dug it up and dropped it in their silo. He seemed really shifty as he said this and almost seemed like he was trying to convince himself of what he was saying, but I brushed it off as I figured he was probably just as shocked as I was. While I was still able to unload, I did have to leave the truck and trailer at the plant that night. A mobile tire repair service would be out in the morning to get it all fixed up. I had a ride back to the farm with our next truck to arrive at the plant and finished out the day pressure washing the manure spreaders. No doubt a reward for my efforts that day. I had to take a good long shower at the farm office before getting in my truck to head home for the night. As I started the engine, I went to pull my phone out of my pocket to plug it into the charger and realized that I didn't have it. I patted all my other pockets. Nope, definitely not there. I then realized that I had likely left it in the semi, which was now at the plant, probably locked behind a gate for the night. Logically, I could have just waited till morning to go and retrieve it. I was probably just going to go straight to bed when I got home anyway, so what did I need my phone for? But because humans now have separation anxiety from their phones burned into them at age 3, I found myself pulling out onto the road in the direction of the plant rather than home. I hoped there would be some friendly night security guard that would let me in to grab it and I'd be on my way in 5 minutes. I reached the plant just as it was getting dark, and indeed there was a security guard standing at the gate as I pulled up. A very heavily armed security guard. He had what looked like a military rifle slung over his back, and I wondered what on earth he needed that for. They were very illegal for civilians to own here in the Great White North, so they must have had a damn good reason to arm their security like this for the government to let them do it. He looked rather intimidating, but surprisingly was not at all antagonistic when I rolled down my window. "Are you lost, partner?" he said in a rather friendly tone. No, I work for one of the farms that delivers here," I said. "My truck blew a tire on the trailer earlier today and it's still sitting over by pit 3, and I think I left my phone in the cab. Do you mind if I go check?" He gave me a suspicious look, then he peered into the pickup bed and generally looked over me and my truck, then he gazed off down the road and looked at his watch. "Alright, you got 10 minutes, and try and stay out of the night shift's way," he said in a much less friendly tone. A loud click and then a buzzing sound came from the gate as it began to move, and I drove through it. By now it was almost completely dark, but the large spotlights of the plant made it easy to navigate. I came around the corner and saw my truck still sitting across from pit 3 and I pulled up in front of it. As I got out I noticed that there was a large excavator up on top of the pile in pit 4. I knew it was digging into the silage, but I couldn't really see what it was doing properly because the concrete wall that separated pits 3 and 4 partially obscured it. I could also see the roof of the snowcat peeking up over the wall. It must have been parked a little ways away on top of the pile and I figured it must have gotten stuck and they were using the excavator to try and get it out. I paid it little attention as I entered the cab of the semi-truck and quickly found my phone in the cup holder. I grabbed it and just as I was climbing down a voice called out to me. "Hey, who the hell are you? And what are you doing here?" A disgruntled-looking worker wearing the same high-vis gear was running towards me. "I just left my phone in this truck here, the security guard let me in to grab it," I stammered, backing up towards my pickup. "Of course, he did," the man grumbled, and he snatched his radio out of his jacket pocket. "Peter, what the hell did you let this dumbass in here for? You can't be doing that," he shouted into the radio. "Relax, they're not even here yet," the guard's voice crackled through the radio. Actually I see headlights. If he's got his phone, tell him to get out of there." The man looked back to me. "You heard him, son, get lost and don't come back here after delivery hours again, you got it?" I nodded and climbed back into my pickup truck and began to drive back towards the gate. As I exited, the guard waved to me from behind the big black GMC Yukon that had pulled up to the gate. He appeared to be talking to the driver. There was a large U-Haul truck behind it, followed by another black Yukon. As I passed the last vehicle, I noticed in my rear view mirror the 3 trucks enter the plant and the guard shutting the gate behind them. That whole situation did not sit right with me. On the drive home, I contemplated everything that I had seen and heard from the guard and the other worker. They were up to something in that plant at night that maybe even the bosses didn't know about. My best guess was it was some kind of drug operation. If movies have taught me anything, drug kingpins always drive black SUVs. I know I should have left it alone, but life up here in northern Alberta was so boring my curiosity ended up getting the better of me. I thought that I could help bring down some kind of criminal organization and be a local hero, and that worst case scenario nothing was happening and nothing would come of it. After harvest concluded, I had a couple of days off to rest as we'd been working pretty crazy hours lately. I, however, did not rest. I was trying to find out everything I could about the plant and the people who ran it. I really couldn't find anything about it. In fact, it was as if the place didn't exist. You would think there would at least be a news story from when they built the place, what with it being the biggest boost to local economy and job market our town had ever seen and all, but there was nothing. Finally, I decided the only thing to do was to see if I could observe what those black SUVs and the U-Haul truck were doing in the plant at night. Maybe get some photos of the exchange and hand them off to the police. I did some poking around on Google Maps and found an old logging road that ran across the ridge behind the plant. There was a little dirt area where people often parked to unload their ATVs to go riding in the woods up there that was maybe only a kilometer or so from the north side of the plant. I drove up there just before dark and hiked down through the woods all the way to the north fence of the plant. It was just a chain-link fence like you'd see around a schoolyard, not a barbed wire prison fence or anything, so I made quick work of climbing over it. Luckily for me, there was a lot of equipment and old dumpsters and shipping containers in this part of the plant for me to hide behind as I made my way towards where the main gate was. I crouched down behind one of their company trucks parked near the gate and waited about 20 minutes before I saw the black SUVs pull up. This time though they didn't have a U-Haul, they had a much larger yellow Penske box truck. They must be hauling some serious product to be renting that thing. I watched as the trucks rolled through the gate, and much like they had done with me a few days prior, the plant workers in high-vis gear directed them back towards the pits. I began to sneak my way over there, being careful to stay out of sight. I realized very quickly that I wouldn't be able to get very close while still remaining hidden. The area around the pits was largely wide open to allow to turn around and back in, so there was nothing to conceal me as I approached. I noticed the office nearby and had an idea. I snuck over to it and tried the door. It was open, but the lights were off inside. Luckily no alarms went off, and I found what I came for quickly. A high-vis uniform and a white hard hat laying on the break room table. I also grabbed some safety glasses and a dust mask, as it wasn't uncommon for the workers to wear them. There was a lot of dust around the pits, and I figured it would help conceal my identity. After putting on the uniform and sneaking back outside, I observed the workers for a few minutes to see what they were doing and how best to blend in. Most of them appeared to either be standing around watching the trucks pull up or walking somewhere, so I figured just walking like I was on a mission was good enough. Turns out I didn't need to fake it for long. As I neared the yellow Penske truck, I saw some men getting out of the black SUVs. They were dressed in what looked like church robes, but definitely not Catholic since they didn't have the collar. One of them turned to me and I froze. "Hey buddy, we got a pretty big load tonight, mind giving us a hand?" Realizing my cover was working, I decided to play along and just leave the part about me helping the drug lords out of my statement to the police. I nodded and walked over with the other workers and awaited instructions. I heard the sound of a diesel engine coming closer and looked over to see the excavator I had seen coming around the corner and begin to climb the silage pile in pit 4 again. The snowcat was behind it, but instead of following the excavator up the pile, it came towards us. It had some kind of large metal box attached to the blade that was about the size of a small car. The operator set the box down next to the Penske truck and hopped out. The same disgruntled man I had encountered the other night got out of the cab. "Jesus man, that's a big truck you got there, probably going to take a couple trips to unload this thing," he said to the men in robes. One of them opened up the back of the box truck, and where I expected to see a giant pile of cocaine bricks or something, there was something I never expected. Bodies, and lots of them just thrown haphazardly into the back of this truck. I had to fight the urge to fill my dust mask with vomit as I saw them. The workers began loading them into the box on the blade of the snowcat, just tossing them on with little regard for how they landed. No one seemed to notice me just standing there, so I slowly backed up into the shadows and made my way over to pit 3. It was almost full by now, so I climbed up the pile to a spot where I could look over the concrete wall into pit 4 where the excavator was without being spotted. Once up there, I saw the snowcat climbing up the pile towards a large hole the excavator had dug in it. There were some more workers up there who began throwing the bodies off into the hole as one of the men in robes climbed out of the passenger seat in the snowcat. He just stood on the track watching as the bodies were piled into this impromptu mass grave they had constructed. He stayed up on the pile while the snowcat went down for the second load. This was all starting to make sense now. This was the perfect cover for disposing of bodies. They would get broken down in the pile same as everything else, and because they were constantly being emptied into the digester, the evidence would only be around for a few months, and the horrific smell of the plant would conceal any foul odors produced by the dead bodies. But there was one question left. Where were they coming from? This was way too many bodies for this to be the mafia or something killing off problematic individuals. By the time the truck was totally unloaded, there must have been 100 dead people in that hole. No, this had to be some cult activities of some sort, and the robes the men from the black SUVs were wearing backed up that theory. Maybe these were just what was left over from some sort of ritual sacrifice or something? Whoever these people are, they must have some kind of deal with the plant's owners, because I could tell the workers had done this before. From the time the truck had arrived to the time the excavator started burying the corpses in rotting corn silage, it had only taken about half an hour. I didn't even bother ditching the uniform. I got out of that plant as fast as I could. I sprinted up through those woods back towards my truck with my heart beating so fast I thought it would explode. As soon as I was in the truck, I locked all the doors and dialed 911 on speaker as I peeled out of the forest. I told the operator everything that had happened over the last couple of days and what I had seen that night. I practically begged them to send someone there right away, which the nice lady on the other end of the line promised they would. She asked for my name and contact information so they could get a hold of me for a statement, which I gladly gave them. She assured me they would investigate the matter, and I thanked her and hung up the phone. I then pulled over and got out of the truck and proceeded to finally let out all the vomit I had been holding in for the last hour or so. I ditched the plant uniform on the side of that old forest road and made my way for home. As I was approaching my house, I saw a car up ahead. As I drew closer, I could make out the distinctive reflective tape they put across the back of police cars. I slowed down as I had come up on him pretty fast, and I didn't want to get a speeding ticket after all I'd been through that night. I followed the cop a few more kilometers towards town. My house was on this road coming up shortly. As we approached my driveway, the cop put his signal on to turn in. I breathed a sigh of relief, as I guessed they had sent someone out to check on me, and I was about to put my signal on as well when I noticed the black GMC Yukon parked in my driveway and the man in robe standing next to it with a gun. The cop turned in and parked next to him. Given that the cop had basically zero reaction to the man standing there with a weapon, my heart sank as I realized whatever this is runs much deeper than I thought, in revealing who I was to that 911 dispatcher had just doomed me. I kept on driving, praying that neither of them recognized me and thanking the Alberta government for not requiring front license plates that the cop would have totally seen on the drive over otherwise. I just kept on driving, expecting at any minute to see police lights behind me or a big black SUV blocking the road ahead of me and men in dark robes coming out of the darkness to get me, but nothing happened. I don't even know how long I drove, for I just drove until I had to pee so badly I was forced to stop at a truck stop and realized I was somewhere in Saskatchewan. I've been on the run, so to speak, now for about 6 months. I don't know if anyone's even following me, but I have to be sure. I'm writing this all out to get it off my chest and out there as a warning before I ditch this phone and start my life over in another province as far away from there as I can get. I don't know what's going on up there, but there is something very dark happening in northern Alberta, and I've probably only scratched the surface of it. Either way, I want no part of any of it.
Weird shit happened to my dad last week. Little bit of a backstory here. Our family business is a printery. It's an old building 4 floors high, including a large attic and basement. Throughout the years, people have all experienced strange things. There are some a few up. Mom's in the kitchen with a friend of hers. They suddenly hear footsteps and a door open up on the first floor. It's probably my husband, my dad. 1 minute later, my dad drives up in the parking lot. They were the only people there, as it was Saturday. The printery also had a teacher for teaching kids typing. He was Indonesian, so that may have contributed to some fear. Always left before the kids did, as he was afraid of the stairs over there, said there was something bad there. Me and my sister do some photo editing in the evening. Start shooting pictures of products. At around 2000 hours, we go to the first floor for some photo editing. 20 minutes later, we start hearing footsteps at the stairs, of which the teacher was afraid to go near. It's past 8 o'clock. There should be anyone in this building, let alone on the stairs leading to the attic. Start hearing the footstep every minute or so. We start noping. If I were there alone, I would have turned off the PC in an instant. Dad calls if he should pick us up. We agree. 3 minutes later, we hear actual angry footsteps on those stairs. Like loud as hell, as to actually tell us to hell off. We quickly go downstairs and Dad has already arrived, tell him everything. Now we haven't heard much from any ghosts or spooks for a few years. We thought they were gone. Until last week, that is. My dad's working latest to finish a few magazines for this company. Suddenly he feels a presence like someone's behind him. Turn around. There is this pitch black man standing behind him. No facial features at all. Might have been some kind of silhouette, but clearly he's seen it well enough to make out it looked like a large man. Yells something like, "God damn it, you scared me." Vanishes within a second. We had some relatives who were psychic come over once to take a walk through the building. They were greeted by a proud spirit, presumed to be my grandfather, as he showed them all of his paintings. Later on, when they get near the stairs, they said it had a bad aura. They were both screaming when they entered the basement though, as they saw something dark down there. Was it a shade? Any advice from professional ghost hunters would be appreciated.